I Hi everybody. I want to start this with an apology. As a Republican consultant, I helped elect more Republican governors and senators than anybody else in the country. And man, that's looking like a heavy burden right now. You've probably heard that convicted sex trafficker, child sex trafficker, Ghislaine Maxwell, is being moved to some nicer prison, sort of a club fed, it seems like, a place that, as I understand it, normally sex offenders are not placed. So, what's going on here? It's pretty obvious that there is a courting of Ghislaine Maxwell by Donald Trump and his Justice Department. And there's really no other way to refer to what the Justice Department is. I mean, Justice Department is going to have to start being put in air quotes. When you have a former criminal defense lawyer for president meeting with a convicted sex trafficker under partial immunity, and what comes out of it is some sweetheart deal to a nicer prison. Let me tell you, when I worked in the Republican Party, one of our key tenets was character counts. Character is destiny. You probably remember that guy, Bill Clinton, and how outraged the Republican Party was with his involvement with a young intern who somehow or another has been posed as the guilty party here too often. This is a woman who was clearly taken advantage of, classic power imbalance of Bill Clinton. And a guy named William Bennett, who was a notable figure in the Republican Party, a smart guy, went to Williams, Harvard Law School. He wrote a book, and I wrote a piece that was sort of about this today in Substack, on the Lincoln Square Substack, I hope you'll read. He wrote a piece, a book called The Death of Outrage, Bill Clinton and the Assault on American Ideals. And here's what he wrote about Bill Clinton then. A president whose character manifests itself in patterns of reckless personal conduct, deceit, abuse of power, and contempt for the rule of law cannot be a good president. That's what we wrote about Bill Clinton. And now we have Donald Trump. And the thing about Donald Trump is there's nothing new here. It's not like we didn't know that this guy was a predator. It's not like we didn't have him on tape talking about assault, bragging about assaulting women. It's not like we didn't have pictures of him and Epstein for decades, for at least a decade, where they hung out together. It's not like we didn't have him on the record saying that he was a very good friend and that he liked to hang out with them and that Jeffrey Epstein liked those younger women. It's not like we didn't know that he married a model that he met at the Kit Kat Club, his third wife, who Jeffrey Epstein arranged the introduction. So there's really nothing new here. And if you remember, go back to the Access Hollywood moment. All these Republicans, they came forward and said, that's it, we're not going to support him. And what did they do? 2 weeks later, they supported him. And here we are. And, I've said this before, but a lot of people in 2016 were wrong about Donald Trump, but it's really hard to find somebody who was more wrong than me. I didn't think he'd win the primary, and I didn't think he'd win the general. And when he did, I had to ask myself a lot of tough questions. How is it that I didn't see this happening? And that led me to write this book, It Was All a Lie, How the Republican Party Became Donald Trump. And what was really important to me about writing this book, one of the things, was not to blame others. I was part of the Republican Party. I worked in 5 presidential campaigns. I elected all these people, helped elect all these people. And, there's a certain trope of book that people write about Washington, if only they'd listened to me. I couldn't write that book. They did listen to me. And I should have seen it. And what became so painfully apparent is that all of these principles that we put out as bedrock values, character count, strong on Russia, the Soviet Union, even the deficit, they were just marketing slogans. Nobody believed it. Some of us did, I mean, I felt like the guy working for Bernie Madoff who actually thought we were beating the market. It's like, what? This was a scam? We weren't? Because I believe that. And, you know, when I looked at the Republican Party and I had to ask myself, like, how did this happen? I came to the conclusion that since World War II, there'd really been two strands of the Republican Party. One that was an Eisenhower strand, boring, governing, sane, and a McCarthy strand, xenophobic, often racist, non-governing, conspiratorial. And I think it's fair to say that a lot of us who worked for George Bush in 2000, who were drawn to this concept of compassionate conservatism, we saw the dark side, but we thought we were the dominant gene. If only because the country was changing so fast that the assumption was that if for no other reason than its own good, the party would have to go with it. And, you know, there's a group of us, me, you look at all of these group of us that we worked for Bush, and we've all come to the same conclusion that Donald Trump was a monster, but he's a monster that we helped create, and we have to come to grips with that. I mean, one of the things that really appealed to me about the Republican Party in theory was the sense of personal responsibility. And that's why when I wrote this book, I said, I think the first sentence is blame me. Because how else can you do that? And so once you accept a guy of Donald Trump's lack of character, a total sleazebag, one of these weird guys, you know, you can throw a rock on the Upper East Side of Manhattan and see him. Inherited money, a guy that was hanging out with younger models all the time. I mean, Trump took it to an extreme, starting at Miss Teen Universe. I mean, give me a break. But once you accept that, of course you're going to end up where you are. Of course you're going to end up being a party that is defending and arguing for pardon for a convicted child sex trafficker. And let's just be clear, every Republican who has not come out and called for the release of all the documents on Epstein and called and told Donald Trump, said it publicly, we cannot pardon Ghislaine Maxwell, they're for it. Because the assumption is they're going to support Donald Trump until they say otherwise. And we've never seen a party abdicate its role of advise and consent the way the United States Senate and Republican Congress has done. We've never seen it. And so, look, I'd say to all you out there, my old friends, John Thune, Roger Wicker, John Cornyn, do you support the pardoning of Maxwell? It's an easy answer. Just say no. Say it publicly. You don't even have to say it. Get your comm shop to put out a statement to say it. Do you support the release of the Epstein files? If you don't say you do, then the assumption is you don't. And all of the files. So what we're seeing here is the Republican Party is no longer a standard traditional American political party. It's an extremist movement. And what do we know about extremist movements? They only become more extreme. The Red Guard didn't end because like a moderate element of the Red Guard or the Khmer Rouge, well, this has gone too far. No. And, you know, I spent a lot of years of my life, in retrospect, far too many, pointing out flaws in the Democratic Party. But it's the only pro-democracy party in America now. And when people try to say that these two parties are alike, I ask myself, I worked for Bush in 2004, close presidential election. If you remember, Bush wasn't declared winner until the next day because we knew that we had won Ohio, but there still were enough provisional ballots out there. In theory, he could have won. And what if the Democratic nominee for president, as the Republican nominee for president did, what if he went out there and said that actually he had won the 2004 election? What would have happened? The New York Times would have taken his head off. The Democratic Party would have said, "You're out of your mind. Shut up. Sit down." That didn't happen with the Republican Party. You know, they are the heirs to the greatest legacy, the legacy of the greatest generation, which is the greatest legacy. People like my dad, 3 years in the South Pacific, 28 island landings. My uncle, who was grievously wounded, never really recovered. They came back and they went about building the country. And they left this extraordinary legacy. And that's the legacy that we're seeing Republicans completely squander now. This concept of rule of law, this concept that there's some decency. You know, if you go back to the McCarthy hearings, there was that famous moment where he said, and I don't know if I'm getting this exactly right, but do you have no decency, sir? If you ask that question now in the Republican Party, at best there'd be silence. Because the Republican Party isn't going to force Donald Trump to do anything. Think about it. Donald Trump instigated a riot that put insurrectionists, thugs, Proud Boys, charging into the Capitol to try to hang his vice president and to try to kill other senators. You saw as they were trying to track down Mitt Romney. So once you accept that it's okay that the guys sent people into my workplace to try to kill me and my colleagues, that's okay. What do we think? There's going to be some principle they're going to cross? Oh, that's too much. Like, I don't know, his position on the law of the sea treaty. No. And it's what happens to people that once you begin to rationalize things and you begin to compromise and you surround yourself with people who are compromising and you look around and you go, well, this senator, you know, he's not such a bad person and he feels the same way I do. There's sort of the comfort of the crowd of cowardness. And that's what's happening now in the Republican Party. And there's nothing really new or novel or interesting about it. It happened in Norway and all across Europe when people in countries that have been taken over by Nazis had to ask themselves, were you going to go with Quisling in Norway or were you not? In France, were you going to be part of the Vichy government or not? So what were they thinking? Probably most of them were thinking, well, they could justify it by, if I'm there in the Quisling government, if I'm there in the Vichy government, I can make it a little better. Maybe they won't put quite so many people on the trains. Maybe they won't torture quite so many people at the SS headquarters in Oslo. And maybe that was true. But was that the right choice? Which side of history would you rather be on? Would you rather be on those that went along with Quisling, maybe to make it a little better, or those that were fighting him? We know where history is on this. There's no monuments to the Quislings. There's no monuments to the Vichy government. It's only those who opposed it. And that's the question that just baffles me about these Republicans. Politicians tend to have big egos. And, you know, that doesn't bother me. So do great musicians. God knows writers do, athletes. And we haven't shot anybody all day for that. But with this ego, don't they realize how they're going to be remembered? And I don't mean 50 years from now. I mean in the near term. And the reality here is the 24 election was not an endorsement of Trumpism. And this is greatly misunderstood, largely by the media. We went into that election with the right track of the country was at 27%. The approval of the president was 40%. Now, no incumbent president or incumbent party in the modern era has ever won the White House when the right track of the country was below 45%, and it was at 27%. And no incumbent party has ever gotten more than 2 points higher than the job approval of the president. So it was an election in which a challenger was likely to win. And we know from polling that other people than Donald Trump would have done better had they been the nominee. So, yet still, we're in this crazy moment where you have this corrupt, lunatic president who's clearly of diminishing capabilities and capacity every hour, who says just the craziest shit, who's put the worst people in the world across this government. I mean, RFK Jr., he's going to kill people. He's going to kill a lot of people. You get Pete Hegseth, head of the largest, most powerful military in the history of the world. You know, the United States military is larger than the next 9 countries combined. People don't realize that. So we have this boozy weekend guy from Fox. No, that what the Democratic Party needs to be doing is saying we're right, they're wrong. There's more of us than there are of them. Go out and seize the moment. And when we're in this weird moment where somehow we're talking about what's wrong with the Democratic Party, what? So they lost an election. That happens. That's supposed to happen. I mean, I worked for Romney. We lost, if you hadn't heard. But that night when we lost, when we went to bed, we were tired, we were disappointed, but we didn't fear for the country. Things were going to happen differently. That's the way it's supposed to work. And yet, how is it in this national conversation, there's an obsession about this crisis in the Democratic Party? I mean, this is insanity. It's the Republican Party that's lost its mind. It's the Republican Party that is endangering, making the country less healthy, making the country poorer, making America less of power. This is a country that, the party that now is, there's a war of genocide against a European democracy in Ukraine, and you have a president who was helped elected by the Russians, who is vacillating over which one he's going to support. And what happens? Look at social media. Look how many Ukrainians died last night. And Republicans in Congress and in the Senate could end that tomorrow if they stood up to Donald Trump and they voted to give Ukrainians the weapons to defend themselves. So, you know, we've gone from never again to, yes, sir, Mr. Trump, whatever you want. And that's a moral collapse of a party. And we should hold each of these people responsible. It's not enough to say that you support arms for Ukraine if you're a Republican. If you do that without calling out Donald Trump by name, you haven't really done anything. You've just kind of made yourself feel better. And, you know, there's an old saying about editorials that it's like pissing in a gray suit. It feels warm, but nobody notices. And that's what the Republicans are doing when they call for Ukraine, but they don't stand up to Donald Trump. So where are we? We're in a moment where the only way that this is going to change is through elections. And this is why we're doing Lincoln Square. And this is why at the Lincoln Project we're fighting. All of this is happening because Democrats lost enough votes to give Republicans control of Congress and the presidency. And the only way this is going to be taken back is by winning elections. That's it. That's our only hope. And it's not a bad hope. I think right now we're in a moment where 2024 was a high watermark of Trumpism and MAGA. I've written about this. Look it up on Lincoln Square. I think it's the Pickett's charge of MAGA. Because there really wasn't an endorsement of Trumpism. They knew that Project 2025 was toxic. That's why they ran away from it. And now that they're making people drink this poison, it's not going down any better. I mean, think about it. If I had gone on television a year ago and I had said, look, a year from now, there's going to be an army of mass thugs with a budget larger than the Marines, with a budget larger than any military in the world except for 2 countries, masked men whose charge is to chase gardeners through Brentwood, you would have said I was crazy. And I wouldn't have said it because I would have thought it's crazy. But that's what's happening. If I had said, well, a year into the presidency, you're going to have the power of the White House clearly beginning to make moves to pardon one of the worst sex offenders, child sex offenders of our time. I mean, the evil of Ghislaine Maxwell. Listen to her victims. Listen to the survivors. It just breaks your heart. They trusted this woman. And what does Donald Trump say when asked about it? From the podium of the White House of the United States, he said, I wish her well. Think about that. We have a president of the United States who's wishing a convicted sex trafficker well, and who now has made her life a lot easier. So look, I say to my old Republican friends, what are you doing? This is how you're going to be remembered. And all of these Republican senators, congressmen, the stuff that they did that they think is important, bills they got passed, a bridge they got built, maybe they got money for a school, none of that's going to be remembered any more than what the segregationists did was remembered. You're remembered because you were for segregation or you're a segregationist. And that's how it's going to be. You're going to remember because you were for Trump. And by being for Trump, you were for pardoning a child sex predator. For being for Trump, you were for equivocating on a war of genocide and helping murder every day and night innocent Ukrainian men, women, and children. Think about it. That's where you're going to be remembered for. So don't tell me you can't vote for Democrats, because that's a choice you're making to be for Trump. And it's not about, do you endorse everything the Democratic Party stands for? Because the Democratic Party actually stands for a lot of different things. But, you know, there's a Democratic consultant, Joe Trippy, former Democrat consultant, who I went up against in all these races. I think he was the best of his generation. He's with the Lincoln Project now. And Joe and I laugh about what we used to run campaigns on and fight over. It was like, is the capital gains tax going to be 34 or 28%? I mean, it's quaint. And if we could get back to those kind of civil arguments about policy and not be a question whether or not you're for sex predator or not, whether or not you're for a war of genocide or not, that would be a good thing. So, look, I think that what's very, very important for everybody out there who's not for Trump, who doesn't, remember, you are right. You're right in every sense. And there are more of us than there are of them. And it's always this thing about authoritarians. They want you to believe that opposing them is hopeless, that this can't be changed. I mean, that's how it works in the Soviet Union. And it worked until it doesn't work. It's how it worked in Chile. That's how it worked in Argentina. But we can change this. And I think we will. I think we're going to look back on this as a dark, dark moment, like Reconstruction in our history. But I think we'll come out of it. But nothing is given. I mean, one of the problems we have with American exceptionalism is that we think it's always going to be this way. And Donald Trump has always benefited from the inability to imagine Donald Trump. Like myself, I couldn't imagine him winning. And then he did. And those Republicans who supported him couldn't imagine what he's doing now. But he's doing it, and they're going along with it. You couldn't imagine that America would vote for someone who had started an insurrection, who was elected with the help of the Russians. But it happened. So just as 9/11 was a failure of imagination, Donald Trump is a failure of imagination. So we need to hold two thoughts in our heads at the same time. We need to be aware of how bad it can be and how this could be the end of American democracy as we know it. And we have to hold the idea that we can stop this. And that's how we win. So I'll leave it there. Thank you for supporting Lincoln Square. Thank you for supporting the Lincoln Project. If you hadn't subscribed to Lincoln Square, I hope you will. There's no billionaires who are going to save us. I mean, we've looked and we see these institutions that we thought were above the pressure from the White House just collapsing, be it Columbia University, be it Brown, be it Paramount, be it the Washington Post. There's nobody out there who's going to save us but ourselves. And we can do it one at a time by supporting voices that we agree with and that we think are important. And I hope you will. And I hope you have a great weekend. Thanks a lot.